this will be the last panel. Thematic session is Internationalization as a mechanism to improve diversity and inclusion. So basically the third theme after diversity and inclusion. And we have a wonderful panel with, first I would like to introduce the only external to Jindal guest today, which is the Vice Chancellor of Shiv Nadar University, Madame Rupa Manjari Ghosh. She will speak first.
So, thank you. It was my loss that I could not come here in the morning. The job of a Vice Chancellor is not very easy, but when Raj invited, I wouldn't have missed such an opportunity. Can't tell you how important this is, so I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll just mention a few, and then if there are questions, we'll do. I know all of you must be terribly tired, fag end of the day. So far, you have discussed the topics of discrimination and exclusion from the challenges perspective, equitable access, how do you cross the barriers of gender, minorities, disability, socioeconomic was the last one that I attended, and it was extremely important. Compared to this complexities, this session probably is a bit of a flat one, but I'll just tell you why it's not so. So internationalization as a mechanism to improve diversity and inclusion, if you read it, there of course nothing that you can say against it, but I think what are the, so some fact checks and the way forward is what I'm going to talk about. So given the fact that there are two approaches actually. Some people would say we have not been able to even manage inclusion at the national level. So why jump to the international scene? And how exactly do you go about it? India had a history when higher education in the BC, for different contexts together. So I'm going to be take a little pragmatic approach in this. I'm a physicist by profession, and the institution that I'm currently running is a truly multidisciplinary one in the sense that we have very strong engineering and sciences, and that's where our emphasis has been together with social sciences and management entrepreneurship. So when I look at private sector, because I'm actually from the government sector for 25 years, served there and then moved to a new upcoming private university, the differences were very, very clear. Some of it came out in the last session, but let me just put it in very simple terms. If you're taking money from students, and it's not for public good, you're a private institution, you're taking money, then as an administrator, I feel responsible for placement. Placement doesn't have to be just industry placement the way it was being talked about. By placement, I mean is basically their career, either academic placement or industry placement or entrepreneurship, or just the freedom that you're talking about. And I'm not undermining the bigger purpose of higher education, which I still believe in, but I think time has come where you need to couch that in a different language, perhaps. The world to be sustainable, that's the major concern for me, and I think time and again I have been talking about it, that what is the purpose of higher education if we cannot live a livable world for our future generations? So the freedom that we wish to earn in the higher education sector has to be for that sustainable future. That sustainable future is the important thing. So in that context, you can put the jobs that are coming in. IBM was mentioned by one of the audience here. And when I look at it, the sectors that typically we call L0, L1 kind of jobs, meaning very low paying mass jobs, you don't need to come to a higher education institution to qualify for those jobs. Actually, this is the reality today. So higher education has become elite in a different way. So I beg to differ a bit from the previous speakers that we are back to that space where this is an elite pursuit for the high end of the jobs. To give you again a very, very simple example, if you look at job descriptions today, I mean, I do read that a lot. The difference between a 5 lakh job and a 15 lakh job, for example, qualifications are just the same. But one that writes a blog gets a 15 lakh job, I mean, provided you are selected, and the other that doesn't. So sort of going back, it is true. I mean, I'm talking about an IT company in India, a managerial post of people who have communication and other skills, not just the technical skills that you need. So it brings back the focus on liberal education in the sense of boundaryless, not in silos kind of education. And we are sort of to do that in some way, I don't know whether this has been talked about, and coming from the science background, let me just put it, we are in this era of what I call education 4.0. So coming from the very quality conscious Gurukul kind of system where transaction was one-on-one, that was education 1.0 for you. You came to education 2.0 where industrial revolution had made what Professor Varghese was talking about, massification. So you could actually scale up operations. What happened is quality went down. So education 3.0 came where we tried to put the best of 1 and 2 together. That is, maintain the one-on-one transaction quality while you scale up. And that was to be done with the handle of technology. Before education 3.0 went out of fashion, came 4.0 because industry has moved to what they call 4.0, and the entire sector is kind of panic-stricken by the disruption industry is causing, right? The kind of jobs that machines are going to take up from you, and I'm going to end with that concluding note, that when machines are going to take up your jobs, it's not just road jobs, but AI and cognition is threatening that they will take up your human jobs. What essentially higher education sector has to think about is that what is essentially human? And I think, and if an algorithm is going to take up your job, then you need better find out why we are humans. And then one, I will give you 2 clues and you can add your points to that. One is creativity. The other is diversity. And by here, this diversity, I mean everything. The multidisciplinarity that I talked about, could be the blog, could it be the diversity you're talking about, because higher education institutions essentially depend on the uniqueness of each individual. So you have to have respect for choices, individual choices, so that you reap the benefit of uniqueness of each individual, and that's really the strength. So, sorry, I have not said much about internationalization. The 2 important points in everything that we do is when you talk about it, so this is taking diversity to the global benchmarking that sort of would satisfy some of the questions Raj was asking, that you benchmark by looking at the global standards, global best practices. For everything, I ask actually as a manager now, Vice Chancellor, 3 questions, what, why, and how, right? So what about it, about internationalization that we are talking about, why? And the why part is the business that I was talking about. It's strict business. It's not a philosophical plane anymore. I can actually quantify it by saying why this is necessary, why diversity is a way of survival right now, and not just a mere philosophy. And the how of it is where the problem lies. Internationalization, which is the theme of this particular session, if you take a look at it, we have not figured this out. We have open ideas, but first question is, anytime policy-wise, if you'd like to make an intervention, you'd like to know how to measure the output of it. So India has many problems. I mean, if you look at the perception, the lynching that happens, the rape cases and all of that, that is probably not a very welcoming destination for foreigners right now. So that's a different discussion altogether. But internationalization suffers right there. So for any partnership, it has to be a complementary 2-way partnership. Partnerships cannot be based on charity. So it has to be based on strengths of 2 parties. So and complementary strengths, for example. So I think this is where it would be based on students and faculty, both on curriculum and research. And then for that, there has to be tangible, measurable ways of judging performance in internationalization. The rankers do it some way. I'm not sure I agree with that. And so that would be another debate, but I'm not throwing the baby with the bathwater. I think this is necessary, but I think we have to think of a very India-specific way of measuring success in this domain. The regulatory bodies, this is another dimension which is connected. That's something I hope some of my co-panelists would touch upon. Internationalization as a measure of this inclusion that we are talking about. There are many best practices that you can follow from there. Discrimination doesn't end there. The color of your skin, everywhere, international or not. Not far from where my university is located in Greater Noida, came to news for some really weird news items there, and the hate campaign that we have seen in this. So it seems like wherever we could find a way of discrimination, we do this. Where we find a way of excluding people, we try to do it. But it makes best sense for all right-thinking people to come it together. This is not a question of diversity from either gender angle, that you are a woman, therefore this is your issue. It's not that I'm a foreigner and an isolated one, that's why my issue. This is an issue that should concern all right-thinking people together. And higher education space is the only free space left in the world, probably, where you could debate and probably come to some sensible positioning of this. So I have too much to say because these are issues that you cannot really cover in 5 minutes, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Wow, what an excellent start. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor, for your interesting vision of internationalization is not so much statistically how many faculty we have from different countries in our list, but how each faculty is international. That's why I myself have a problem when we say that 20% of the faculty in Jindal are international. It's actually not true. Everybody is international in terms of education in the high level institutions all over the world. So even not only the 20% foreign faculty, but the 80% India faculty are extremely international in their education, in their approach, in their methodology, in their pedagogy, and all of that. So effectively, when I see myself in the report as citizen of Bulgaria, I was thinking, actually, it's very interesting. Nobody ever in my life, I was thinking of myself as a Bulgarian here. In fact, I'm very little Bulgarian in my life. I worked for United Nations. I was in Japan for 10 years before India, in London for 11 years before that. So I need to go very much back in my chronology to came to my grandmother village and say, yes, actually, yes, I belong to that grandmother village in Bulgaria. So we are so international, all of us, not only the foreigners, but also the Indians, because they are the same. All the Kalyani and other, Sriram, Syracuse, and best university in the world you can see in Jindal. Sometimes I go to a reception where I'm the only non-Indian, and people approach me and ask me where I am from. And they're very disappointed when I said Sonipat. They're kind of, they look at me and they don't know whether I'm joking or what I'm saying. And I say, no, I'm serious. And I give my business card. I show proof of evidence that I'm from Sonipat. And they keep watching me and they ask the same question. I mean, really, where I am from. Again, I go 30 years back to say I am from Bulgaria. But let's move to New Zealand now, where we have Thomas, our Dean of Architecture. Please.
It's interesting. I don't think of myself, I'm a permanent resident of New Zealand, but I also live in Sanapat. I'm going to try to just come up with 3 quick snapshots, because I think the whole question of internationalization and diversification is solidly embedded in the pedagogies and the principles we use in teaching design. And design thinking and design is a fascinating discipline that gets its strength and its financial value from including the greatest diversity of voices in the design process. The more different perspectives, viewpoints, subject positions, and invisible networks that people bring to the table, the more resilient the designs are. So if you design a library, it's best to get people besides librarians on the panel to decide it. So this is something that actually I learned in the university too. About 100 years ago, first snapshot, there was a new type of pedagogy pioneered in design in a public school in Weimar, Germany, after the collapse of the German government and the financial system. That was called the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus is having its 100th anniversary now. It only lasted until the Third Reich shut it down. It was a public school. It was filled with students that now people are doing research on and discovering there's a lot of invisible women that were the pioneers of these new pedagogies. It technically was Industry 2.0 100 years before, because they were dealing with abstractions as a way of anticipating a machined culture. And a lot of the work that's being done now is putting out that the internationalization, the gender diversity, the illegal jazz parties, all of that ambient curriculum that was, excluded from the paperwork, but a lively part of that experiential learning, was internationally significant for centuries. And so I would like to put a little appendix on the report that we're supposed to be discussing, which has done an excellent job of mapping and documenting and counting what we've done, and flip the pancake, take the question out, and say, what will be our global impact in 20 years? How international will the ideas that we're forming now and next year be in transforming the world? That's the debate I want to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Sriram, next.
Thank you, Vasilin. I want to highlight one aspect that has not been discussed, but which is actually very central to the diversity debate in social sciences, especially in political science, my field. And this is the ideological diversity, left, right, and center. And this is always, it's like an omnipresent thing, staring at us on every question we examine. So internationalization, which helps diversity, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how it helps. Like the best global universities, we have at Jindal tried to give students the choice of deciding for themselves on any matter, whether they take the left point of view, the center, or the right, or maybe something that does not even fit into this ideological spectrum. But still, having non-Indian, or Vasilin's point is well taken that all of us are international in many ways, but having non-Indian voices do help in increasing the, stretching out this spectrum as far as we can. So I'll give a couple of examples. Our vice dean, one of our vice deans in the School of International Affairs is a former foreign minister of Syria. He's Arab, Dr. Abdul Fattah Moura. Now, he served with Hafiz al-Assad for many years. He was his translator and then also became ambassador and foreign minister. Now, he joined us around the time when the Syrian war was at its peak. And there was significant interest among the student community to understand this. And what we were getting was largely a Western perspective on who is to blame for all the horrible massacres and the killings that were going on. And the perspective was very clear. It was simply, the narrative was that Bashar al-Assad is a dictator, a tyrant, and a brutal maniac who's just slaughtering his people, and he must be stopped. So this was the mainstream liberal Western perspective that for lack of a clear Indian narrative outside government, most people tended to believe this. Now having somebody like Dr. Amura help to bring nuances into this. He was not a supporter of Bashar al-Assad. He had left the government and he had his own reservations about the direction the current Syrian president was taking. But nonetheless, his view was that the war had to happen because of Syria's independence and radical role in the region to oppose the Western agenda. Now, in India, many people are skeptical about the West, and in that sense, we are left from an international point of view because we've always believed that there's injustice and unfairness in the world, and we need to correct it. So, obviously, the truth lays somewhere in between, and we let our students make the choices. But the point I'm trying to make is, without this international faculty member who brought in this critical non-Western perspective, we would not have had balance in understanding this in a way, because the mainstream had been completely whitewashed to represent one viewpoint. And then I can give more such examples where ideologically we had to correct the imbalances by bringing in faculty from other parts of the world. Even students from other parts of the world help to correct imbalances in the classroom and in beyond. Now, over the years, Karim is here and Qasim is here, and I'm sure he'll talk about it. But over the years, we have been fortunate to have students from Africa. Now, suppose there is a heated discussion in classroom about European role in Africa today, right? Now, our own African students would bring a very critical perspective that often we would miss. So, of course, as I said, India also has this post-colonial identity, and we often criticize the Western role in developing countries. We ourselves are dissatisfied with what the West has done. We also are critical of Chinese role in the developing world and all that. But to have African voice is important because these are usually the most marginalized. So both at the level of faculty and at the level of students, having diversity brings in that extra edge you cannot get in a textbook, and you cannot probably simply keep on hearing from a professor. So you will need that kind of balance in the classroom. Last, I want to mention something else with diversity and internationalization, which is all the mobility that our students have. My colleague, Professor Kalyani, runs these programs. The thing is, these also open new vistas. We have had students go to countries that are usually not on the radar. Quite a few have been to Israel, quite a few have traveled to China. So what I'm saying is, in the process, they would come back carrying the understanding that there's another way of looking at the same problem. And which could echo our experience in India, sometimes could contradict it, right? But being open to understanding that is critical. And that can only come through, I think, through human experience, not through second-hand learning from books or journal articles or the news media. So I think we have to bring the human element into this and expose. And I know that bulk of Indian universities cannot afford to get foreign professors and they cannot afford to send their students abroad. And that's a larger question because unfortunately they are being deprived of these kind of things. There are dozens of international relations departments in India that languish due to the lack of such exposure to other voices from around the world. So I think if we can bring that in somehow and share these resources, I think we in Jindal have been very keen to get our foreign faculty to go to public universities which are underfunded and to do it for them, and to also impart some classes and lectures and to transfer this knowledge, this alternative way of thinking and these paradigms. So I think that's how we can ultimately do this, although it's a drop in the ocean, and with 850 universities or more in India, I don't think any of them or most of them are getting to hear this other side of the story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sriram. I think Kalyani can follow very nicely from what you just said to continue exactly to explain the over 250 collaborations we have and how they enrich the curriculum and both in terms of students and faculty.
Indeed. Thanks, Veselin. So I'm going to talk about three aspects very quickly. First, empowerment as the link that brings together internationalization and inclusion. Second, current practices that run counter to the aspirations of empowerment and inclusion. And third, empowering the student who doesn't study abroad through internationalization. What Sriram just mentioned tends to happen in a lot of cases. And obviously, I'm going to focus on student mobility as a key element of internationalization, although internationalization is not only limited to student mobility. I'm going to focus on that aspect in making these points. So, study abroad and empowerment. So empowerment is an important objective of education in general, both in a means to an end sense of achieving material and worldly success, but also in an individual and socio-psychological sense. The study abroad experience enhances the prospects of student empowerment in the following ways. First, by enabling the student to apply their knowledge and life skills in a new environment. Second, by inviting the student to accept the challenge of surviving and thriving outside their comfort zone. Third, by inspiring a sense of unity and oneness with others, despite differences both superficial and significant. And fourth, by broadening the horizons of students in terms of how they perceive their future prospects. Now, a student empowered in this way, to my mind, is likely to face diversity more positively, constructively, and proactively, directly enhancing levels of inclusion in complex environments. So next, I'm going to flag certain current practices that I believe are antithetical or run counter to the realization of these goals. First, we see that there is a mismatch between student expectations from study abroad and the institutional drivers of internationalization. What do I mean by this? For example, when entering into mobility agreements, institutions focus more on academic articulation, and to be fair, are also bound by various practical administrative considerations. More broadly speaking, when seeking out institutional partnerships, universities focus on prestige, rankings, and ease of doing business. The upshot is that institutions that have diverse strengths rarely end up in collaborative arrangements with each other, and ultimately this has a negative impact on the diversity of options and experiences available to students. Under these circumstances, attaining the full potential of internationalization would require nothing short of resetting systems of knowledge creation and dissemination on an equal footing, as opposed to current hierarchies and segregation into sending and receiving regions resulting from these. So Rhodes Must Fall comes to mind, what Sriram alluded to, decolonization of the academy comes to mind. All of the movements that are pushing back against the epistemicide perpetrated by the hegemony of Western scholarship and positive science come to mind. And incidentally, it is my observation that the foreign universities are not in India for charity, but I won't say much more on that right now. My last point, we must of course consider in what ways internationalization might benefit the students not covered by study abroad programs. We have found at Jindal Global that opportunities to volunteer on international conferences and as student buddies for international students have been richly rewarding for the domestic student. Additionally, creating a more inclusive campus environment for international students and faculty members and offering them avenues to showcase their diverse cultures and perspectives, as Sriram already mentioned, and previous speakers to him, could indeed go a long way. To conclude, diversity and inclusion are today among the most prominent concerns facing universities in a day and age where their relevance, impact, and viability are being called into question. Unleashing the potential of internationalization to empower students, staff, and the wider community could, I do believe, allow us to tackle many of these questions. Just as long as we remember that the quest for knowledge is inspired by the need to relate the local with the universal, the self with the subliminal, and the situational with the transcendental.
Oh, thank you so much, Kalyani. Yeah, we always realize in what good hands our international office is, and in fact the office itself is a major part in institution building and making Jindal Global University such international space. So thank you for all excellent work and for your presenting it to us today. Okay, Kasim, you want to follow up from this, please?
Thank you very much. I would like to start from Vasilin's point about not really seeing himself as Bulgarian presently. I think I also fall in that line because I have been out of my country for more than a decade, and whenever I go back, they don't really see me as being part of them, and if I go out, I don't really belong there, so the question of identity has always been a problem to me as to who should I really say I am. So that's really why I think this particular discussion relating to internationalization is very, very important to me, not only because I have interest in human rights law, about diversity, about inclusion, but because personally this is something that is very dear to me because of the experience I had, because of what I have seen, how I was treated in many places that I have visited. And when we look at the situation now, presently we are living in a very troubling time. You have these problems of conflict, you have discriminations, marginalizations, and things like that. You have discussions related, politics of hatred, politics of race, politics of religion, politics of ethnicity, politics of sexual orientation, all this type of discussions. So these are really issues which I think really need to be looked at. Now, We are living in a very globalized world, but then unfortunately, from what I am seeing around, is like we equally have a problem where we are becoming a bit more disconnected. In the sense that when you look at the political leaders, what they are doing, what they are saying about integration, trying to divide people on the basis of fear, on the basis of identity, on the basis of nationality, really, these are things that we really need to look at. And I see universities as a very important venue that we can inculcate in the minds of our students issues concerning these things that we need to take care of. Now we are having situations where previously communities and countries that pride themselves in diversity and are now championing discrimination and marginalization, are championing all kinds of things around the world. You look at what is happening from the political leaders, you look at the question of Brexit, for example, you look at the politics in Brazil, in Hungary, in Poland, in Italy. It's really very troubling time for some of us. Now, in my educational pursuit, in my travels, in my career, I have seen quite a number of things. I love traveling because it gives me the opportunity to see what is really happening around the world, to get to know others, to get to know about culture, to get to talk to people and understand why they think the way they think, why they behave the way they behave. So far, I have been able to visit about 45 countries around the world, and not everything really was rosy, but there are a couple of things that I think really are very, very important to take note of. Now, I came from a very conservative family, a very conservative background. The training I received was not what we may call open and neutral. To a greater extent, you find religion, customs, or cultural affiliations impacting in the way we were raised. But my first experience about diversity actually was when I went into the university. My university is one of the very few universities in the country that really pride itself in admitting all kinds of people from different backgrounds, from different cultural orientations, from different religious or geographical regions. So my experience there really opened my mind about diversity. We had situations that really put us to challenge what we believe in. We had situations that really question our very existence. But the interaction I had with the people from different backgrounds, from different orientations, proved to me that it is the humanity that really matters. It's not really about who I am or where I come from. It is about discussing about what is really good for us, how we can make our environment good, how we can make our environment better. That experience really impacted heavily on me. Now, when I went after graduating from the university, I went for my master's in Geneva. I went also to Amsterdam, and then I went to PhD in Maastricht, which is a very internationalized university, so to say. Now, the people I met there, the people I interacted with, really proved to me that internationalization is something that is very, very important in bringing human beings together, in bringing issues which are so controversial into being discussed. Now, in the places I have visited, I have seen quite a number of things in my life, but what that actually proved to me was that it is about lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. It is about not being able to appreciate what others are passing through. Some of the things I have seen, I know there is a fear. I know there is lack of understanding. That's why people are behaving the way they are. So I see universities as a breeding ground that can cultivate this type of things in the minds of our students, in the curriculum we teach, in the interactions between different cultural backgrounds, that internationalization really is something that should be promoted. Internationalization is something that will make our world better. That way we can be able to appreciate our differences, we can be able to appreciate why we are the way we are. It's not really about, it is generally about understanding each other. In one of the founding fathers of Nigeria, Sir Ahmadu Bello, he made a remark when the then president visited him and talked to him and said, we should forget our differences. He said, no, let us understand our differences. You are a Christian from the East. I am a Muslim from the North. By understanding ourselves, we can build a nation. So I see that if we really don't interact, we don't discuss, we will not be in the position to appreciate ourselves. We will not be in the position to come together and make our world better. If we allow all these things to be taken over by our political leaders, then we will get to a situation where nobody will ever be able to sit with a person that is different from another location and discuss and try to see common ground, try to see what we can be able to do. So I see internationalization as part of, as being really a very good mechanism for inclusion, not only because of the benefit it brings, the innovations, the enrichment of discussions, no, but it is about really identifying ourselves, it is about working together, it is about finding common grounds that we can be able to build our world together. So I think internationalization is really something that is important to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasim. Thank you indeed for your excellent reminder what would be the opposite of internationalization, which would be nationalism and xenophobia and populism and all of that. And the danger of, and you mentioned several examples of going back into such behavior and how destructive that could be. So in a sense, internationalization is really the way not only to improve the higher education, but the communities and the society as such. And you are very correct by saying that, in fact, we don't do it on purpose. We don't hire somebody because of nationality, but we don't try to be diverse. We simply hire the best talent on the merit. And because every little place in the world has its merit, there are talents in Africa and in Asia, in Australia, in Europe, and everywhere else. You bring this talent in Jindal, and you become diverse by the matter of fact, and not because of some purposeful project to put numbers on statistics. Excellent. So let's move now to Musumi, please.
Actually ended at a wonderful note, which is really going to help me present my research, some of the findings from my research with all of you here. And he emphasized the fact that irrespective of difference, we need to find common ground. And that's the richness that internationalization can bring to the discussion of diversity and inclusion. And that common ground, as Professor Rupamanjari Ghosh already referred to at the beginning of this panel with regards to issues, global issues that we are all facing irrespective of which country we belong to in the context of the age of sustainable development. So now let me share with you a little bit here before I begin with regards to how I came into doing this particular research. Once again, you know, it kind of leads to our sense of identity, who we think we are and who other people think we are. I kind of got our Vice Chancellor a while ago showing the statistics, said here's a Bengali conspiracy. Look at the number of faculty we have from West Bengal, the statistics among our faculty. So I don't know, this was probably I can't say it's a Bengali conspiracy. I was at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I had no knowledge prior to I landed at that university that there was some historic connection of the university with India. But because I was an Indian student, all my American professors over there, the entire committee, including an Australian professor, he's very much an Australian professor, though he might look Indian, like some of us, but he's an Australian. They all started making me getting excited about this project because I am, from my name, it tells everybody my ethnic background and my identity. I'm a Bengali. With an Indian passport. Okay, so Bengalis means you have nostalgia about your culture, your language. Tagore is a major figure, so you have to get excited about this. So this is how I started getting excited about this project. Believe me, prior to that, I personally had no wish, no idea. I wanted to study higher education reform in India. That's it. That was my interest as a doctoral candidate. Okay, so a little bit of this. Now, this is an archival image of the Tagore Circle in Urbana-Champaign. And as you can see, this image is from a Tagore reunion, December 25th, 1960, at Professor Seymour's house. Professor Seymour, who was himself a language faculty at the time, he used to teach Spanish, actually. So Tagore actually visited United States 5 times, and by the time, he was visiting in 1916, there was already a huge fan base, and there was a Tagore Circle at Urbana-Champaign. Now, what I was trying to look at through this project was studying the history of higher education reform in the United States and India. In a comparative framework, and particularly looking at universities which are located in rural, within a rural community. And in that way, both Shantiniketan, Vishwabharati, and Urbana-Champaign share that context, irrespective of the fact that historical, political, and other socioeconomic contexts were very widely different. This was British India versus fast industrializing North America. Now, I would like to share with you some actually quotes from Tagore here to share with regards to the conceptualization of an international, how he was actually conceptualizing the idea of an international education and higher education within the British Indian context. And this is from an essay, but it was actually one of the talks, an international university published in Modern Review in 1921. He writes, "Hereafter my life and all that I have, which only a little is, to be devoted to establishing first in India and then elsewhere, if possible, a university in which the better minds of all races to whom we most look for leadership may mingle, and the culture of the East and the culture of the West may be united in fellowship. It is people of the world mind that we need, and people of spirit that we need to see we are all citizens in the kingdom of ideas." Now, you can do a critical textual analysis of all of these quotes, which I'm not going to do right now. I just wanted to quickly run through some quotes from Tagore relevant to this panel's discussion. Here's another quote from Tagore, 1924, after his visit to China. "Let us unite not in spite of our differences, but through them, for differences can never be wiped away, and life would be so much the poorer without them. Let all human races keep their own personalities and yet come together, not in a uniformity that is dead, but in a unity that is living," taking the conversation back to what Professor Kasim referred to, one of the founding fathers of Nigeria also referred to. Now, and this is another quote, 1926, from the essay A Poet's School. The minds of the children today are almost deliberately made incapable of understanding other people with different languages and customs. The result is that later they hurt one another out of ignorance. Veil of ignorance, somebody mentioned, in the previous panel. The result is that later they hurt one another out of ignorance and suffer from the worst form of the blindness of the age. I have tried to save our children from such aberrations, and here the help of friends from the West with their sympathetic hearts has been of the greatest service. And here he was also referring to a lot of his friends that he had made, particularly in the campus at Urbana-Champaign. And this quote, I already shared this quote with you all at the inaugural panel today in the morning about his idea of university. So I'm not going to read out this quote once again. So I'll move on from here to quote from a scholar who actually studied Tagore's connection with Urbana-Champaign and published this article in 1961. So what Hurwitz is saying that the warm reception given to Rabindranath Tagore in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois is very encouraging to those people who, like the Indian poet, are desirous of world peace and world brotherhood. Even in this provincial Midwestern American community, there was a large group of enthusiastic people who immediately responded to Tagore and were sympathetic to his plea for world cooperation. In these dark days of international tension and animosity, it is heartening to recall the love that went out in America to this gentle Indian pleading for international cooperation and understanding. So it's quite interesting. This was written back in 1961, referring to in these dark days of international tension and animosity. So what I could, going through a lot of letters exchanged between the Tagore Circle and Tagore, including the fact that I also came across a letter from the then President James of Urbana-Champaign, who actually wrote to Tagore himself, inviting him to give a series of lectures on Indian religion, philosophy, and society. And they were actually also kind of driven by this impulse at the time to increase diversity on campus. In fact, there was actually a trigger event that happened. There was, and this is actually there in the campus magazine, Illini Daily. At the time, it used to be called Illinois Magazine. So it's reported in the Illinois Magazine, and it's there in the archives. So there was a lot of rising Christian right evangelical activities on campus at the time. In fact, Tagore, as many of you, those who are from this part of the world might know, Tagore sent his own son and a student from his school in Shantiniketan to study agricultural science at Urbana-Champaign. And his son actually was very involved in setting up the Cosmo Club on campus. In fact, he took leadership in setting up the Cosmo Club, and thereafter in several university campuses in the United States, Cosmo Clubs started becoming very much of a popular thing. And in one of the newspapers, it's reported actually there was some incident on campus where some students in an international, and Tagore's son was also part of it, got involved in some kind of protest against some evangelical priest who made certain, not very welcoming remarks towards international students. So I'll quickly conclude, and that led on to a lot of other drives, including the president writing to Tagore to give a series of lectures. Later on, he was, of course, not able to stay on that long to deliver the lectures during the semester, but he actually delivered those lectures over the Christmas break at the Unitarian Church on campus, and which were later on compiled into a book that is available for everybody to read. So in terms of issues of inclusion and diversity, there are these issues of actually now, in the morning in the inaugural panel itself, it was discussed, Tagore's own institution, the way he had conceptualized and the way he was actually, it has not sustained in that way, frankly speaking. So what can we, the reason I wanted to share this with in this panel is to set us think in terms of, we are talking about the need for internationalization to drive the sustainable development goal itself, then how to actually also sustain internationalization and make internationalization really inclusive. It's not just giving access, but also making internationalization inclusive, and so that people feel welcome, and that model can be sustained in the long run. It's not an easy thing to do, right? So that's it. That's my little presentation. Thank you all. I'm open to asking questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Musumi. You should have been in the keynote speakers with this excellent analysis and going back into Tagore and the history. So we have only 10 minutes to absorb everything this excellent panel said. Let me go back to something which Vice Chancellor mentioned. What is the future of the education and the jobs? What are the challenges? What our students do expect from us, and how important is exactly because of the speed of the dynamism of the changes, how we need really to grasp with that speed. And often this is the AI, the robots taking our jobs, and what we need really to do is to prepare the future generation. This sustainability as an approach to think about the next generation. It's about our children and what they will inherit. And for that matter, it's very interesting to think about, well, particularly for the legal education, that it needs also to change. It needs to prepare some sort of super lawyers, people who can embrace rather than worry from the modernity and from the technologies. We are asking ourselves what our profession will be, and then the students should also think in the same way, not to worry about robots taking our jobs, rather to create the robots to take our job. I would be happy if I do something repetitive every day to create a robot to do that one. For example, teaching. If a robot can come and take my classes and give me free time to write my books and do my research, I'll be very happy. And then I will have more time to create the next robot who will write the books and do the research. So that way of thinking about future rather than worry about future is, I think, quite constructive. Okay, we have times for debates and comments. Yes. No, shall we open? We have little time, and we are told to finish at 6 o'clock. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. My name is Abhishek. I am an MBA student in Jindal. So I specialize in HR and marketing. So we have a subject called diversity and inclusion management. So recently I read a report which was published by the Leeds Metropolitan University. So they classify internationalization of higher studies of international students when they go to a different university. So they classify it basically in 3 matrices. So the first one is structural diversity, which defines how the university structure supports the ethnic groups, the demographics of the university. Second one is the classroom diversity, the classroom diversity in how the curriculum supports or teaches the students, international students, about diversity and everything else. And the third one is informal international diversity. So informal international diversity is basically the connection or the contacts that international students make outside their classes, like the outside classroom experience. So my question here, like there are 3: structural, again classroom diversity, and the third one is informal international diversity. My question here is, which one of this, because they've not stated anything on top of it, they just explained it. So which one of this would you feel is the most effective form for an international student or in the process of internationalization for diversity?
Well, I think it's all. These are known methods now we all share. What you did not touch upon, and I think that's the most critical one, is how to counter unconscious biases. Okay? You did not touch upon that. And I think in India, for example, if you look at it, if you look at the official rules and regulations, there are no biases there. That doesn't mean that everything is honky-dory here. And I think when something is in writing, you can intellectually question, come up with methods to counter it. And I think our major problem in this country particularly has been, and it's actually not just limited to India. I've been to the US for a very long time and now in Europe for a very long time. It's actually everywhere. It's these unconscious biases where you cannot put your finger in there, but this is what universities should be good at. The reason I was talking in kind of dry terms, because there, at least in that space, you can have in principle ideas implemented. Humans are much more complex than that, and I think that's the point that this classroom problems, if you live in India with so many states, the diversity is enormous. Already, how many languages do you, for example, know? I can talk about myself, So already you're exposed. It's not about internationalization. This is, you see, whenever no two people are ever the same, right? If you look at the granularity of things, then a class of 30, for me, are 30 individuals with their quirks and all kinds of things. And I think all three that you talked about, it applies to every scenario in every university. But it's the unconscious biases that we have. Sometimes it's physically how you look and what language you speak, what customs you have, and my bias against some of that, which I do not explicitly state. And I think universities should talk about that much more frankly, and that exists, and whether you know it or not. Examples are galore. I sit in selection committees, and this is selecting people, right, who are qualified. I mean, there's I don't know whether that event is true about Thorat passing on CVs with changed names, but I see it for myself about gender. You walk in, I'm a physicist, I'm the odd one, right? You hardly see another woman sitting in the panel, and I'm now chairing. This has been happening for quite some time. A woman walks in, the kind of questions that are asked. You're shifting from Bombay to Delhi, does your husband know? And so I could not control my panel. So next time a man walked in, I asked the stupid question that, does your wife know you're shifting from Calcutta? Are you sure? So let them be. It's not pertaining to a physics job. So these are biases. And internationalization is much more pronounced. The idea that some countries you have to pay more to get them, as Vice Chancellor, I'm facing it. And I can tell you a number of measures that I have taken to make it work. But these unconscious biases, we have to collectively fight. The results will not come in one day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just quickly also respond? Thank you for asking this question. I agree with what the VC just said about diversity in India, and I would be very cautious about force-feeding ourselves and the kind of diversity we have here into those categories which Leeds Metropolitan has come up with. In fact, I call it the tyranny of best practice, which is a big overhang of internationalization right now, where everyone's trying to compete on the same turf. And also, I would put a big asterisk under it and say that students should not form the impression that all the learning that needs to happen, especially about diversity and inclusion, will happen on the campus or in the classroom. Because, especially for the international student, the main learning is to experience the culture and the society outside of campus.
Okay, last round of questions. We're almost out of time. Anybody? Yes. Yeah, please, go ahead.
A question for Professor Michael, and you said that it is, if one is thinking of internationalization, is one thinking of bringing any idea or perspective to the table, to the international table?
Yeah.
And how important do you think that is? You just mentioned it in the passing, but
yes, I think it's actually a core construct, because if you see, again, from the context of design, designers are expected to live in the future and evaluate potential futures, grab one, drag it, nail it down into the present, and bring it to reality. And you can't do that by yourself. So it's not just the visionary capacity, a lot of it is the ability to socialize information and to show people how to see things. And it's been my experience working as a designer, working with design students, working with government people, working with NGOs, that having diversity around the table when you're problem solving, or actually more importantly, what we do in design is problem finding, because often you get halfway through a process and you realize you're asking the wrong question. So you do what Goffman does and you reframe, and you say, we're halfway through this process, we're cooking the wrong thing, we should have asked this, and then you go ahead. That's where it helps, because you've got, and it's not just disciplinary promiscuity or I guess plate envy that other people know more than you do. It's recognizing that you can't know everything and valuing people for their expertise because they've invested those decades of work so that you don't have to, and knowing that they've got your back and you've got their back. So there's not going to be any true communication without trust. But trust is an important part, I think, of interdisciplinarity, and having people with international experience, having people who have degrees from different universities or work experience in different countries, the more internationalized you've made your own subconscious and imagination, the greater and the more robust I would, idealistically believe you could bring to the table when you're doing that problem framing. And so you start to appreciate people not for their similarities, but you appreciate them for their differences. And that's how we design.
Okay, we did almost the impossible, starting half an hour late and finishing on time. And it's nothing to do with me, it's with the panelists who did a marvelous job in synthesizing the huge experiences all of them have into a very short 5 minutes speeches. And I think it shows also very much the richness. The whole day today is extremely rich of opinions and ideas, and we really are very happy that our panelists contributed immensely to this discussion about dignity of difference, about the importance to bring diversity, inclusion, and internationalization. So give me a good applause to this excellent panel. Thank you, everybody.